Turkey, 1995. A site was discovered that made archeologists reevaluate their theories about the Neolithic revolution. But could they still be wrong? In Britton, France, there are fields of standing stones. Could there be a connection to Greece or even further away? A Latvian man builds himself a large castle. Some speculated he learned how by unlocking knowledge that was handed to the ancient Egyptians. Could his trail lead us out of this world? Hi, hello and välkommen to Digging Up Ancient Aliens. This is the podcast where we examine the TV show Ancient Aliens. Do the claims hold water to an archeologist, or are there better explanations out there? I'm your host Fredrik, and this is episode 16, and we will look into the explanations for the unexplained structures around the world. With us on this trip we have no other than Dr. David S. Andersson, who usually can be found penning articles for Forbes Science, Washington Post, just to name a few, and who is an expert on the ancient Mayans. But at night and even sometimes during the day, he also dives into the more fringe areas of archaeologists. He will soon get a chance to introduce himself in just a moment, but before that, remember that you can find sources, resources, and reading suggestions on our website, diggingupancientaliens.com. There you will also find our contact info if you notice any mistakes or have any suggestions. And if you like the podcast, I would really appreciate if you left one of those fancy 5-star reviews that I heard so much about. Well, enough of me jammering. Let's see what structures we can be tearing down today. And I want to welcome Dr. David S. Andersson to the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on.
For any listener who might not be familiar with who you are, do you mind telling them a bit about your background and experience?
Absolutely. So I received my PhD in anthropology from Tulane University, primarily at the time then with a focus on studying the ancient Maya. In particular, I was very interested, still am very interested in the socio-political development of the Maya. So a lot of my field work in Mexico has involved studying the very earliest phases of Maya development before we get to the big pyramids and hieroglyphs that most people are familiar with. I did my dissertation at a small site called Stobo, which dates back to about 500 BC and would have been sort of a chiefly capital of sorts at the time. And it's great because it's squishy and weird. It's very obviously Maya, but it's not. We don't have this entrenched bureaucratic state yet, but we have lots of ball courts and other fun things. And so that has been my traditional field work. But particularly since 2012, actually, so I guess a good solid 10 years now, I've been more and more involved in publicly responding to, engaging with, and discussing pseudo-archaeology. These things like you're talking about with ancient aliens, but it goes way more broadly to that, to all kinds of sort of misrepresentations or misinterpretations of the ancient world. And I try to play with that definition a lot of like what is pseudo-archaeology, because it's really easy for people to sort of fire back and say like, oh, you just don't like that stuff, or you don't agree with that stuff. It's not a pejorative term. I'm not trying to use it as a smackdown and say like I'm just going to dismiss this with this one label and walk away. I read this stuff. I watch this stuff. I've gone to some pretty interesting conventions about this stuff. It's pseudo-archaeology uses fundamentally different methods, methodologies, and concepts than archaeology does. And oh Nelly, we saw some of that on display in this particular episode we're talking about today.
And as you mentioned, you have been a bit in the pseudo-archaeology. Do you have a favorite pet theory?
Ooh, yeah. Oh, I do. Actually, I totally do. One of my absolute favorites, and I've gotten to see some of these firsthand, are the Acambaro figurines from West Mexico. These are some little clay figurines, and if you
Mm-hmm.
Google it, you get a bunch of stuff. And I'm a little iffy when you Google it about how many of them are accurate, actual photos. But the short story is like these are little clay figurines that were made in 1940s to be sold to a German collector, and they claimed they were real, and they showed humans and dinosaurs like living side by side.
Ooh.
And then a couple of them actually have the humans riding the dinosaurs. And it's one of the most obvious hoaxes you can possibly imagine. And there's been testing of these things. Like we 100% know it's a hoax, and yet they still crop up occasionally. Like the young Earth creationists really like them because it suggests humans and dinosaurs saw one another. It still shows up in some of the pseudo-archaeological circles as well. Uh, I've seen the University of Pennsylvania Museum has some of their collection. I got to see those there, but the first time I ever got to see one was very randomly. I was staying at a bed and breakfast in Virginia where I live on my anniversary of all things.
Yeah.
And as I was like walking out the door, the woman who owned the house said, "Wait, you work in Mexico? I want to show you this figurine." And she trotted out this horrendously ugly figurine, and she's like, "My husband thinks it's from Mexico. He said they bought it, and it's just like this is." It was one of those moments where I'm like, I knew exactly what it was because they are very unusual in how they're made, and their shape, and their style, and they're very poorly fired.
Mm.
I'm like, I was so excited. Like, I know this is an Nicambro figurine. Like, and I tried to explain it to her, and she's like, I have a fake dinosaur figurine from Mexico. I'm like, yes. And she's like, why are you excited? I'm like, I know.
I think I've heard them in passing in Young Earth Creationist, but I'm not that familiar with them. But
they made the circles, and there's a really glorious. Fate magazine was a really big pusher of the paranormal and UFOs and whatnot in the United States in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And there's a glorious cover illustration on Fate magazine of people riding dinosaurs that is based on these figurines.
So how about we start to dig into the Ancient Aliens claim? Do you mind telling the audience which episode we watched?
Yes, so we were watching episode 8 from season 2. At least on my end, it was called Unexplained Structure. I think they meant structures, but they took us around the world and they did a classic pseudo-archaeological thing where they said, "Who cares about timeline? Who cares about chronology?" And so they started presenting us places like Göbekli Tepe, which is in Turkey, Sacsayhuaman in Peru. They took us to the Karnak stones in France and to Karahung in Armenia and to Coral Castle in Florida, which was actually built in the 1920s by a guy. And this is like my favorite part of the episode. They're like, how could he have made it? I'm like, you're showing us photos of him making it in the show. But how could he have possibly made it? And it's classic where, and this is to me what the great thing of the conspiracy angle of Ancient Aliens. If they're right in this show, this means there is consistent, ongoing alien contact around the world from 12,000 years ago to 1923. And they apparently are the only ones who have noticed. And all the academy has missed this global 12,000 year conspiracy.
But you're not familiar with, or you don't know how much money the archaeologists make on their science?
Oh, I am rolling.
You know how much money and prestige they would lose if they accepted this?
It is classic. I actually had a great example of this where I had just finished my PhD, but I had not gotten a job because lo and behold, jobs in archaeology in the academy are really hard to come by. And they don't pay well, even when you do come by them. And I was working in a bookstore, and I agreed to give. I was giving some 2012 lectures about Maya 2012 and the calendar and whatnot. And this guy came up to me afterwards and wanted to talk to me. And he had found these objects in his sort of backyard, so to speak. And he believed that they showed connections between where we were, West Virginia, where I was at the time, and Egypt and the Maya and all these things. And he argued that the West Virginia was the crossroads of the ancient world, was his argument basically. And I was like, send me your website. I'd love to see it. And he sent me his website, and I wrote him a long email where I'm like, I don't think you're right, and here's why, and here's what. And I was like, here's what you would need to prove this to someone like me. From my opinion, I tried to be very polite and respectful and engage with this conversation. And when I
Yeah.
sent that email, I got a blister of an email back with lots of all caps and lots of swear words. But it particularly is like your whole profession's a joke, and you're in it for the money. And I just stared at that email like I'm working at a bookstore for minimum wage. Like literally, I am like barely getting by right now. But apparently, I working at a bookstore for minimum wage can control a global conspiracy.
Yeah, and if we work at this bookstop store, we basically put everything on the line to defend
Yes.
the theories. But I know that Graham Hancock, that shows up in this episode quite a lot, usually loves these types of argumentation. He used it in the show even. I think it's back in season 1 that he talks about all those scientists in their big ivory
Hmm.
towers and piles and money, and just you wait, we will prove them
Yeah.
wrong
Meanwhile, he
soon.
has almost every book he has published has ended up on the New York Times bestseller. Before COVID, he was giving lectures where it was like $3,000 a ticket. I think it was. It was ridiculous. I will have to double check exactly how much money it
Mm.
was per ticket, but it was a huge amount of dollars to go and just see him speak. But no, he's like we're the ones that like are just getting rich off of this. Yeah.
Yeah, could it be therefore he's not on the Ancient Aliens live tour? He wants more than...
I would love to get in his head about this because the first topic in the show was Göbekli Tepe, and they interviewed Graham Hancock a lot
Yeah.
for this site. And for those who don't know, Göbekli Tepe is an incredible site built in Turkey about 12,000 years ago. It's this has these amazing circular subterranean temple structures, all built by hunter gatherers,
Mm.
which is one of the most extraordinary things about the site. And it's really challenged us to make sure we think carefully about how cultures develop and what comes first. Do we get farming first, or do we have before we get things like temples and religions and complex culture governments and whatnot? Um, Incredible site, really worth talking about. In fact, I love it when people say like the archaeologists won't talk about Göbekli Tepe, and like, well, one, they're the ones who dug it and published it. Two, the textbook I use in my class, for my archaeology class, Göbekli Tepe is literally on the cover of it. And I use a
Yeah.
National Geographic article about Göbekli Tepe in my 101 class. Like, no, we talk about it all the time. But I was saying I'd love to get in Hancock's head about this and know what he thinks because Hancock and Robert Schoch is also in this episode, particularly in the Göbekli Tepe
Mm.
section. They are not ancient alien guys. So
No, they are more the ancient
yeah,
civilization type of people, and they, as I understand it, Hancock can be quite upset if you mix him in with the
hmm
ancient aliens
yeah, because
crowd.
he did Hancock did publish a book, the Mars Mystery, the Martian Mystery, something like this, where he alleged that there were Egyptian style monuments on Mars, and so he did dip his toes in the ancient alien bucket, but then he kind of ran away from it pretty fast after that, and yeah, so in a very real way, like Hancock and Schoch are being misrepresented in this episode as well. So like you literally have like they're talking about an ancient lost civilization, and it's pretty clear to me watching them that that's what they think they're talking about. But if you don't know their ideas and haven't read
Mm.
their books, like they make it sound like they're supporting this as an alien structure in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, in a sense. But how about we talk a little bit about this Göbekli Tepe that we archaeologists refuse to acknowledge. So it was discovered in
Mm-hmm.
1994, as I've understood it. This is not my area of expertise, but as you said, it's a hilltop. The question is, again, what we should call it, basically. If it's a
Mm-hmm.
temple or a hill fort or what it's what it was used for. I've seen discussion that we should not call it
Mm-hmm.
temples due to we're not sure if it's really a religious site or not. And as we understand, they might not have been an organized religion as we will
Mm-hmm.
classify it, which would make the temple classification a bit weird in that sense. But at least it was a place to gather. As we noted, it was quite early in our history, so hunter-gatherer
hmm
society, and as you mentioned, it do question or what comes
hmm
first in the Neolithic revolution, but at the same time we have other examples of quite advanced hunter-gatherer societies like the
hmm
Yamon culture in Japan.
They make some of the oldest pottery in the world as hunter gatherers.
Yeah, all this pottery, and they didn't move
hmm
around really. They had a sedimentary
hmm
lifestyle, which we usually classify with farming society, agriculture
Yeah,
society.
no, it depends on the environment, right? Whether hunter gatherers have to move around constantly to find new food sources, it depends on the
Hmm.
environment. And there are many places in this world where you can get a relatively good calorie intake without having to travel a lot as a hunter gatherer. Now, it's interesting because it's actually Göbekli Tepe has been spun as revolutionary, as totally changing history, as totally rewriting our understanding of human development. And that has always been spin. It's a really cool archaeological site. It's a really important archaeological site, but it is not the first time we have seen hunter gatherers building monuments by a long shot.
No.
My personal favorite is in the United States in Louisiana. There's the site of Poverty Point, which is a massive earthwork site that was all built by hunter gatherers
Hmm.
again. And let me say too, because I think we're not just speculating that these are hunter gatherer sites. There are telltale material culture signs of agricultural production that include things like the actual plant materials themselves. Plant materials that are being cultivated do survive in the archaeological record, particularly in garbage pits sometimes. The tools that you need to process those plants, like almost every grain has to be ground. That requires a mortar and pestle or
Hmm.
mano and metate of some kind. Like there are literal material culture signals that go along with the switch to agricultural lifestyles. And those signals are not at Göbekli Tepe. They are not at Poverty Point. Like it's very clear that these are not sediment sites. They're sedentary sites where people are living and growing food. But instead, and this is where is Göbekli Tepe religious? That's where it gets fun. It's like, well, what is religion? What is the definition of religion? How do we understand non-organized religions this far back in time? And it's a classically hard question to answer in archaeology, but Göbekli Tepe is,
Hmm.
in my book, it's a pretty obvious that it's a special place. Like usually,
Yeah.
we do have some subterranean dwellings where people live underground here and there around the world, but it's not normal. And so the fact that these are built underground is like, okay, this is a little bit different to begin with. The fact that they're circular and have sort of a, again, not unusual, but uh, or not unknown, but not this regular, like every building circular. And the great thing about circles is the way that they focus people's attention. Like if you're standing around the edge,
Hmm.
everybody's got to look to the middle. Or if you're standing in the middle, you've got everybody and everything all around you. And they're really great for focusing attention in that sort of way. Um, I think we should talk about the monoliths though, because at the center of these subterranean circular structures, there's many of them at Göbekli Tepe, and there are also many other sites in the area in Turkey that have the same kind of subterranean structures. Göbekli Tepe is not unique.
Yeah.
Everybody should go to Tepe Telegrams, which is a website run by the German Archaeological Institute, and the folks that actually work at Göbekli Tepe and excavated and work there. Um, the upright monoliths in the center of these subterranean structures have animals carved on them, which they really focus on in this episode. They're like, "Oh my God, they're animals!" And there was they tried to make an allusion to this being Noah's Ark. It's like,
Yeah, they do enjoy the doomsday and floods, and we will get to it later. But the axis shift, not uncommon in the ancient
yeah,
aliens catastrophes. But they make a parallel to Mount
hmm
Ararat, where the Noah's Ark would be, and this is only 350 miles. That's for a European doesn't really tell me much, but apparently they think it's close enough. So, Noah would
Yeah.
have come to Göbekli Tepe and
Let's just say like most people can walk about 20 to 30 miles a day at best. And so that means this is like, a solid month away. Like it's not close. I mean, yes, it's closer than like I sitting over in North America, but yeah, they lean into the flood mythology going on here. And I think that they lean into, in particular, and this is classic Ancient Aliens, they lean into impossible. Like, how could people have precisely carved these monuments and raised them up? And it's like, it's limestone. People have been cutting, carving, shaping limestone all around the
mm,
world for tens of thousands of years. It's a softer rock. Like, this is actually normal things for people to do. And yet and this is where like the show leans so heavily on hyperbolic language and it just assumes that
yeah.
we won't question it. And they're like, no one could raise a 15-ton monolith, they say. Like, you know what? Go look up Wally Wallington. I love Wally Wallington, who was this guy who
Mm,
was attempting to build a Stonehenge in his backyard by himself. And he's a retired, like 65-year-old contractor, not a bodybuilder or anything like that. He's just a regular person. And
mm.
he's using leverage and gravity. And there's a video of him out there on YouTube raising a 16-ton block by himself, like by
Yeah,
himself,
and
like let
moving.
alone if we get a couple of people to help. 15-ton monoliths, they're like, nobody could raise a 15-ton monolith. Like, yes, a 65-year-old dude can do it by himself. But they just like lean into like no one can do it, impossible, perfectly chiseled, like it's limestone. And this is totally one of those things where I love doing this. I love being on your show. I'm glad you're doing a show like this. But there's a huge part of me where it's like, oh my god, why do we have to respond to this? Like every word that's coming out of their mouth is utterly ludicrous.
Because, well, it's interesting and unfortunately it catches people's attention. So, did you hear about the Turkey
Yes.
politician who jumping on the Göbekli Tepe bandwagon? It was alien building
Mm-hmm.
this, so it affects politicians, which in turn affects where the money goes. Will it go to real science or to again, the Bosnian pyramids, for
Yeah.
example, who gets quite a lot of funding, at least previously have gotten money that could have gone to doing real science and instead looking for pyramids that doesn't exist in Bosnia.
And this is exactly why, like, I'm glad you're doing a show like this. It's why I jumped to be on a show like this. People eat it up, and
Yeah.
that's real and that's important. And I think it's something archaeologists need to acknowledge more and understand more, because like there's such an incredible story of human achievement here, and in Göbekli Tepe, around the world, all of these sites, there's an incredible story of human achievement, and I think we as archaeologists can tell a better story than these flash in the
Hmm.
pan sort of conspiracy theories. But we've got to meet our audience where they're at. We can't sort of stay in the. I will give Hancock this, like we cannot stay in the ivory tower. We cannot just write detailed theory written articles for other academics and publish them in peer reviewed journals behind paywalls. Like, yeah, of course we're losing this fight.
Yeah, we need to get our storytelling more creative. We can still create engaging stories and narratives, but that's dipped in, well, a more common language and, of course, real
Mm-hmm.
knowledge. Because, well, we are losing, and it's because peer-reviewed journals isn't as sexy as Ancient Aliens in the end. But as you said, they don't really want to say what type of stone they use
Mm-hmm.
at Göbekli Tepe since it is. Is it limestone? I thought it was sandstone, but I might be.
I think it's limestone. It's possible it's sandstone. I didn't double check that, but it is.
Either two are, you, as you said, quite
Mm-hmm.
soft stone, so it would be a logical first step to carve for a civilization that's, dipping their toes in monument building, because otherwise they usually make a huge deal if it's a
Mm-hmm.
granite or any harder stone. How could they build this? Should we move on to
Yes,
Cusco maybe?
please.
Or do you, anything else you want to bring up on
Well, actually, I do real quick. 'Cause we were talking about flood myths for a second there, and they did tie this to Noah's Ark, and I love the line in here where they're interviewing. They have Graham Hancock, and he says that archaeologists are aware that there are 2,000 myths of a great flood around the world, and this is one of those classic ones where for me, he sees this as evidence of conspiracy. That there's a giant flood that destroyed this ancient civilization that he's a promoter of, and every time
Mm,
I hear people pushing flood myths and saying like this must have some grand significance, I keep thinking like, well, maybe the grand significance is floods are scary, and like anyone who lives anywhere near a river will at some point in 50 years of their life see a really scary flood that washes everything away. It's kind of like, why are people
mm,
scared of the dark? Because there are things out in the dark sometimes. Why are people scared of floods? Because floods are terrible and can really destroy an entire town in a blink of an eye. And so it's funny.
mm.
They see conspiracy, they see cover up, they see giant interpretations, and what I see is like just totally normal daily life. And it's like, yeah, floods are scary.
Yeah, we actually covered this in the last episode a little bit, but as we mentioned there, that what they forget to mention, they're looking very specifically at places where that has flood mist, and then forgets the ones who
Yeah.
hasn't. So flood mists are usually quite common, as you said, where where you
Yeah.
have floods, for example. While here in Scandinavia, we don't have any myth about
Hmm.
floods because it wasn't common back up here. We had other things to worry about, like winters that were lasting
Yes.
7 years and things like that. So again, it's a culture thing. And as you said, we're afraid of things that scare us. For some, it's floods. For other, it's of everlasting winter for obvious
Hmm.
reason. But let's move from here to Cusco in Peru. From what I know, at least, is that Cusco is quite influenced by, or in some sense, influenced by Tiwanaku.
Tiwanaku is a predecessor in the region that's about 400 or 500
Mm,
years earlier than the rise of the Inca Empire. This is it's interesting to me, at least in the United States, the Aztec, the Inca, and the Maya sort of loom very large in what our general people know about the ancient Americas. And both the Aztec and the Inca were really only around for a couple hundred years before the conquest began, and we see colonization and all of its horrible
mm,
effects. Um, yeah, they focus on Sacsayhuaman, which is an Inca fortress that has one of the most impressive examples of Inca style masonry. And you see
yeah.
this at many Inca sites, not just Sacsayhuaman. You see it all over. It was a standard building technique where they build large walls with multi-sided stones. They don't have like four sides. They're not like a block. They are five, six, seven, eight different sides or planes on them. They make really cool geometric patterns, and they're gorgeous and they're impressive and they're mortarless, which is what a lot of these the ancient alien folks focus on, is that you can't slide a piece of paper between them, and they're these perfect joins between these super large rocks. Um, they didn't tell you some. It's interesting. Some folks who are interested in ancient the lost, mysterious pseudo ancient civilizations really love the nubs that are on these rocks. They didn't show us any of the nubs in this episode.
Mm,
What we know is that they used to leave little rock nubs on the sides of these blocks, and so that they could raise them and lower them with levers as they were working on that fit to get that perfect fit. And this I love Inca masonry. If you have not seen Inca masonry before, like it is some of the most impressive human architecture that has ever been created. Like there's a reason they focus on it. There's a reason people are drawn to it. But the cool thing is it's very human. Like they spend so much time in this episode talking about what they might be mold made. Like these rocks were like poured into molds and placed somehow. They bring up this classic legend from South America that birds could peck through solid stone using some sort of chemical, and so they might be shaped like that in some way, shape, or form.
yeah.
Uh, but the reality is that there have been multiple experimental studies done over the last 50 years recreating some of these walls. Like all you need is another rock, and you pound one rock flat with another rock, and then you place another rock on top of it,
Mm.
and you stack them. Like it's this is again one of those things where it's like it's actually so simple. They're suggesting grand explanations. It could be aliens. They must be mold made. There's a bird that can peck through solid stone. When we've literally recreated these walls just by banging rocks together, like it's absolutely incredible how they take the simplest thing, which is very impressive, and I love, and I don't want to underscore that, but it is the simplest manufacturing technique you can imagine, spun up into an alien conspiracy. It's amazing.
Yeah, but especially around, as you mentioned, the AC, that's a claim I've encountered a lot before. And here I must say that even some in the fields have maybe done us a disservice. I know that Edwin Barnhart,
Mm-hmm.
Mesoamerican professor who do a lot of public speaking, I think he has done some for the great
Mm-hmm.
courses, a few courses on Inca and Mayan prehistory, but he brings up that he used acid to shape stones in his lectures.
Oh, what?
Yeah, and I just came to think about it because I remembered that I heard that before, but in a completely different setting. So I went back and found all the great
Mm-hmm.
courses that I had stored away, and yeah, he do bring up on his course on the Inca culture that we don't know how they formed this, but they used probably acid was his theory. Uh,
Oh, and this is yeah. No, I've got a video I can send you of a guy making one of these walls. Like it's just banging rocks together, and it's incredible the dedication, the time, and I think to me this is sort of the grandness of it. Like if you think Göbekli Tepe, if you think Saksai Woman is so amazing that it has to be aliens,
hmm.
like just think how much more amazing is that people did this, like, and that we have the evidence for it.
Yeah, it's again, they don't really make a good case why the aliens would have built this. They just say, oh, this is too difficult for humans to do,
Yeah,
which.
yeah. There's sort of the standard. Well, it's too big, it's too hard. It must be aliens. And
And then I like how they bring up the whole, oh, but they have some engineer on
mhm.
Brandenburg, what's his name? Yes. And he talks about how many people you would have needed to do all of this. And then they forget the whole Inca structure in general with
Ah,
workforces and that you poured
and
in.
literally, the Inca Empire was a practice forced labor. Like as they expanded and took over new regions, they would say, "All right, you're working for us now," and send people to build stuff. It's still one of my. I mean, it's not the episode we watched, but it's one of my classic favorites. I often have my students watch an episode, and we talk about it. And way back, and you covered season one, episode one. They're interviewing a sculptor who's goes on and on, like nobody could have carved these blocks at Tiwanaku. And at the very end of his interview, he's like, "Well, they could have. It just would have taken a lot of time." Like, yeah.
Yeah, that's Christopher Dunn. We actually met him again in
Was he back
this.
in this one? The same guy? Oh,
Yeah, he was in this one,
I'm
Christopher
thinking
Dunn.
of yeah.
The worst stonecutter slash engineer. he's he claims that he's a stonecutter, but he never can figure out how to
Yeah,
cut stone. Except, well, you just need a
yeah.
lot of time. He
Time. Lo
usually,
and behold.
and we also meet George Delgado.
Hmm.
That's speaking about his space brothers that I haven't been able to figure out where it comes from, and he pops up in this show quite a lot with different job
Oh, does he?
titles.
Interesting.
So in one episode, he's a mountain
Hmm.
climber. Another, he's an
Hmm.
author. Another, he's an explorer. In this one, he's a
Yes, he
shaman.
was their indigenous shaman for this episode, sort of giving that voice of authenticity.
Yeah, but the Space Brother thing, they talk a lot about it, but I've never figured out where it actually come from. If it's something Delgado has made up himself, or is it part of Mayan culture, Inca culture? Because they put them all across the Meso and South America, but
Yeah, this is
never given a source
yeah,
for
at
it.
best, this is sort of like a extreme stretch. I mean, he's talking in this one, in this episode, he talks about kind of goes from that bird that might be able to peck through stone to suggest that maybe it's
Yeah.
like a humanoid with a bird head to like, oh, it's an alien.
Sacsayhuaman means the head of the falcon, falcon's head. But maybe it was some falcons or maybe some bird people who could connect with the place.
Like he jumped, like you literally watch him jumping from one to the next in this episode as he's trying to push through. And this is the thing, and they do this a lot with religious texts around the world in the show and Von Daniken's books and whatnot. It's like if you start with the assumption that religious texts are about aliens, and then you read religious texts that are in translation, and you cherry pick out little tiny pieces of those texts, like, sure, you can say there are sky people who are our brothers. Like, yes, because translating religion is incredibly complex and incredibly hard because you're always speaking metaphorically, you're always in an illusion territory, and then you put that into another language, and of course it's going to sound strange and funny. And they take advantage of that, and they cherry pick it to all high heaven throughout these shows.
Oh, sorry, I don't want to interrupt you for too long, but if you don't know, I have released a new show called Archeologists and UFOs. And in this show, we explore single artifacts, places, or ideas discussed in, well, this show and, of course, on Ancient Aliens. And this show is aiming for a little bit shorter format. An episode will be around 10 to 15 minutes, perfect for your friends who might not want to listen to a 2-hour show on Ancient Aliens. The show will be in audio and in text format if you would rather read it, but why would you? To this, you will also find bibliography and sources. So when you're done with this episode, head on over to Archaeologist and UFO and have a listen. Our first episode is on the Sakara bird that we talked a little bit way back in episode 1. I have since found some more information that I think you will find quite interesting. Well, that's all. Let's get back to the discussion with Dr. Andersson. So how about we make a jump and skip to France?
Yes.
Or Britton in France. And we will talk about the Karnak stones, which is menhirs, as it's called. So it's Old French for standing stone, basically. So it's very well described, which are the menhirs are all across the globe, technically. But especially in this area in Breton, France, you have quite a lot of them. And especially the Karnak stones is a long stretch of stones arranged from biggest to smallest on the field. And I actually was there last November for my birthday.
Excellent.
And looked on the different different stone. We were driving all across Europe, so we stopped there to look in. But it's a quite impressive field, but they make a lot of claims in this
just a few
episode. Just a few. We have Childress, for example, talking about there's some magnetic field that makes technology not work properly while he's on camera, yes. Which I found quite amusing. But cell phone and compasses works just fine. Today you're not allowed to walk across the stones as he did, unfortunately, due to they're afraid of people tipping them over, making damage to the area. So one of those sites that unfortunately gets closed down to save it. They claim that these are quarried stones, which I found quite amusing, because even in the show you clearly see that they are not carved, they are not shaped, they are just found, tipped up, and voila, you have a menhir. They might have brought them for a little time, but again, it's not a tricky monument to build, so to say.
They're rocks. They're big rocks, but they're
yeah, big standing rocks. And as I said, it's a quite easy monument to build, so I don't see how it would be strange really for people to just, we tip it over and here we have a monument to whatever we want it to be. We have a few in Sweden, and if we look on the sites in general, you have a lot of dolmens, the little stone houses. So you have bigger stones and you put a few over, slabs
Yes.
over, and you have a grave inside. And they don't really spend much time of those. They don't mention the biggest stone. That's actually quite impressive. Menhir of Ergra, so is this giant menhir, some 300 tons. They forget to mention just, I think it's 15 minutes drive from Karnak even. So
why go?
Yeah, I'm not sure why they didn't bring that up, because that would
my
it
understanding,
would have
and this
helped
is
them maybe.
hearsay from another someone who has actually worked on the show. They relied a lot on stock footage, and so they didn't always have the money or the budget to go places. And so I'm totally conjecturing here, but it might just be like, well, they had the stock footage of that, so let's talk about this. And if they don't have stock footage, then they can't use it.
Actually, that makes a lot of sense thinking back of it.
It's like it was a cheap show to put together, and it still is, as I understand.
Yeah, but they actually have children walking along the
so they definitely go to some
they
places.
had a team there. And from talking about this world grid theory that they bring up again, and that Karnak would have been part of somehow, we have another of these extraordinary claims that it's one of 3 things that you can see from space.
I loved that. We're like, Tsuklos himself, the guy with the hair, is like, yes, Karnak is one of 3 things you can see from space: Karnak, Nazca lines, and the Great Wall of China.
And that is one of only 3 things that you can see from outer space. It's Nazca, Great Wall in China, and Karnak.
Were they meant to be seen by people in the sky? And who could have been flying at that time other than extraterrestrials?
Like none of well, I mean, I guess it depends on what you mean see from space, but literally none of that is true. Like if you look at the astronauts in the International Space Station, they cannot see the Great Wall of China, like without a telescope. Like it's like it depends on what you mean by see from space. But literally, the people orbiting the planet now, looking out the window, cannot see the Great Wall of China, let alone Nazca or Karnak. Like they just make stuff up.
Yeah, and if you think about it, it wouldn't make sense. The Karnak stones, they are not wider than maybe 2 people hugging.
That was amazing. Like Karnak, like Great Wall of China, I get why people say this, but Karnak, they are rocks. Like, no, you can't see that from space.
Yeah, I even had to pause the show and then go to Google Earth and just, can I find these monuments by just scrolling in? And no, I could not.
But the world grid, I loved here too, because you often see, and this is one of the things that drives my interest scholarly in these topics, is there's so much overlap. And as soon as you slide into the paranormal world or into pseudoscience or pseudoarchaeology, you regularly bump into other claims. And this world grid ley line concept that they're laying out here, they're touching into a lot of New Age spiritual ideas about earth energy and whatnot that they're freely borrowing from other belief systems here, but somehow implying that it was the aliens who knew this rather than the humans.
Yeah, and then the world grid system, I think they have it as some sort of that it should be able to open different portals and things like that, or to recharge spaceships or whatever they have made up in the past.
And it's such a classic cherry picking too, where it's like, look, all of these sites are on a line or in this grid pattern. It's like, yes, if you zoom all the way out into a map of the globe, and then use a symbol that's about the size of a country to represent each of these different archaeological sites. It's easy to make it look like some of them, and then forget all of the ones that you're not including on that map. Like it's the easiest way to make it like, oh, that's a grid pattern. All those archaeological sites are in a grid pattern. Like, yes, that is total like manipulation of imagery right there.
Yeah. And on the term of manipulating imaging, they then start to talk about one other pet theory of them, Pythagorean cult
Mm-hmm.
or
Oh,
science.
yes.
So they bring up the triangle and how Karnak were supposed to be in a advanced Pythagorean type of triangle. And they show a picture on the screen with the Karnak, with the stones are on one line. You don't have really anything beside it. And somehow they form a triangle of this one line. On even on the shows, you have one dot, and then they just draw a triangle out of nothing. And Thucydides say, how could they have knowledge of triangular math? Because reasons.
Well, this was definitely, I mean, one of the inherent problems with this show is there is a structural racism that lies underneath it, where they constantly hold up, like, how could these humans have figured this out? I mean, the Greeks figured it out. And of course, Tsoukalos is Greek. And he's like, well, I mean, the Greeks figured this out. That's totally normal. They could have done that. But these other people could not have possibly figured that out on their own. Like they don't go to Greece and ask how Pythagoras figured out. Like Pythagoras must have had alien help. No, Pythagoras is smart because he's Greek. He would have figured it out. But the people who built Karnak,
No, he might have had. They actually brought that up in the
did
earlier
they?
episode.
Oh, good.
How aliens influenced Pythagoras, Da Vinci,
I guess the Da Vinci episode.
Van Braun, and yeah.
It's
so they select some people and then they tell them all the secrets, except things like germ theory. And,
yes. Well, we get. I mean, we're skipping to the end here, and I don't want to skip past Karahung, but they give Ed Leedskallen, special alien contact. This man who built Coral Castle gets special alien contacts.
Let's talk about Karahanga,
Yes.
I think. So it's a site in Armenia that for me was quite unknown previous to this, but it's some 7,500 years old, some 203 slabs of basalt. And as far as I understood the science from what I could find, at least in my research, is that while some in the past has wanted to put this as a astrological site, some doesn't really believe it any longer.
Yeah, I love this. This is a site that's a little off my map. I don't know much about it, but I love this line of like, oh, it aligns with the constellation if we decide that there was a pole shift, a rapid pole shift of some kind or another. It's like, oh.
Yeah, so the theory in the show is that this is some sort of warning about pole shift, that scientists, they do happen, but they are very, very slow and takes a lot of time, but not according to ancient aliens, because then their theories wouldn't line up and work. So you have a rapid pole shift, and this is the warning for it somehow. And
there was a there was a great line at the beginning. I think it was Hancock who said this, but someone basically said mainstream archaeologists don't know who built this site, and it's one of those lines that to me was such this like classic throwaway, where it's like, yeah, we don't know their names. And we don't necessarily know the language they spoke. There's a lot that we don't know about people who built archaeological sites all around the world. So it's a true line that is sort of meaningless to actual archaeology, and yet if you put it in the context of a show like this, it sounds mysterious all of a sudden. Like mainstream archaeologists don't know who built this. Like, yeah, no, we don't. Like that, we're never going to know who built that. Like no matter how much work we do, we don't know who built most of the monuments in the ancient world. Like we don't know, at least in terms of their names. Like Teotihuacan. Teotihuacan is one of my favorite archaeological sites in central Mexico. Huge city, probably home to 100,000 people. We don't know what language they spoke. We probably never will know what language they spoke or what ethnic terms they knew themselves as. And so you can say we don't know who built Teotihuacan because we don't know their names. We don't know their ethnicity. We don't know their identity. But we've done a ton of research there. We know a lot about them. We know a lot about the site. But it's like it's such this throwaway line. We don't know who built this. Like, yeah, no, we don't. Like that's normal, not a conspiracy.
Yeah, and I think that's something that the pseudo scientists have as their advantage that science isn't
Mm-hmm.
exact. Even if we basically know a lot about them, we never say, oh, for sure it was this and this and
Mm-hmm.
this, because it might change as we uncover new
Mm-hmm.
information. So we want to be able to adapt, which again, it's a language thing that maybe we scientists needs to handle a bit
Yeah.
better and educate on how scientific language work and what we really mean when we say we don't know who built
Yeah.
it. For example, with Tiwanaku, but we don't know what to call
Mm-hmm.
them or what they call themselves, or
Yeah, and it's so important for us to be clear and to it's like I understand scientific academic approaches that we don't know the full answer and we never will know the full answer, but we need to emphasize what we do actually know, and that just because we something new might come along that will alter our understanding, that doesn't throw out what we previously learned, that there is still good information out
no. Here they also bring up some
there.
petroglyphs
Yes.
from the area, and Martel especially focusing on a few reliefs that they don't say where they're
Mm-hmm.
found in the context.
Yeah.
I didn't manage to track them down good. All I managed to get from the pictures were reference to ancient aliens, usually not a great sign, but there might be
Mm-hmm.
from somewhere in that general area. But Sukalos is holding up a picture of a stone slab with two people
Mm-hmm.
that holding a disc. And
Yes.
what does he say? Yeah, that they are having these.
The disc is floating in
Share.
space, like, or
Yeah, the
like there's
disc
a
is floating
circle
in
in
space, and
between
if you
them,
look at
and so
the
that's
and if you look at their faces, they look like gray aliens. And sure, we can give it to him. They kind of look like gray
yeah.
aliens.
There was definitely one of
Yeah.
the pictures, that, not the one he was holding up, which it kind of like the big one he was holding up just looked like had sort of big heads. There was another picture that to me it was like, oh yeah, that totally looks like gray alien. But like to me, the funny thing of all of this is how retconned it is, in that there's literally no description of gray aliens until 1960, with the Betty and Barney Hill
Hmm.
abduction case. Like that's the first time anyone ever describes a gray alien. Previous alien encounters that people alleged are described differently with different types of aliens, and so it's so there's so much of this of what we expect alien life to look like. This is also like, let me just say, like, I
Hmm.
love it if alien life was real. I am super interested in that idea. I think if we ever actually meet alien life, we're going to have a hard time recognizing it, not for scientific reasons, yes, but almost more for pop culture reasons, because we've had the gray alien image so like jammed down our throat that when the aliens show up and they don't look like that, we're going to be confused.
Or isn't
Yes.
reptilians. Yeah. But yeah, it's an interesting site, Karahugi.
Yes.
And well, it would be interesting to know more about it. I think Wilcock is trying to make some connection to the Orion correlation,
Mm-hmm.
but he switched it out to the Cygnus, the swan,
Mm-hmm.
and claiming that, oh, the swan was very important to the Greek culture and the Chinese, and I don't know.
I have to throw in here too. This is always the classic. Like every culture makes up its own constellations. Like this is such a
Yeah.
classic of pseudo archaeology. They're like, look, let's use this Greek constellation and apply it to a totally different culture. Like, no, they drew different pictures in the stars.
Yeah, it's a bit amazing, but they're trying to find pattern and then they match it as they see
Yes.
fit in general. How about we get to the craziest part? I usually have something that's really out of top in the
Mm-hmm.
end to keep you on toe through the episode. So we are going to talk a little bit about Coral
Mm-hmm.
Castle, who was built by this Latvian loner who had knowledge that no one else had. What they call lead
Mm-hmm.
scalding,
Litzkallen.
I
Yes.
think. Yeah. And as you said, it's quite amazing. So the claim is that he built this whole stone park with, you have a lot of stones and monuments and quite large stones by himself. And this is some sort of wonder, and we don't know how he made it, they say in the show. And then they show the tripod with the pulley system on it. And I think you...
Yeah, there's so much of we don't know how he made it. And here's a picture of the tools he used to make it. Oh my.
And they zoom...
No, and it's
you
such
zoom
a...
in on a
like,
little...
Coral Castle is, as far as I'm concerned, a classic American sort of thing where it's built by an immigrant, which is so much of our country that leans into this, but it's a tourist trap. It is entirely like, come to this really weird, random, giant ball of yarn and pay me $5 to see it. Like, Coral Castle is the classic American tourist trap where he built the weirdest thing he could so people would come and see it. And sure enough, 100 years later, people are still paying tickets to go to Coral Castle and see it. And so, they reference some of the interviews with him, like always, like he was being sort of cagey about how he built it. He wouldn't tell people exactly how he built it. Like, yeah, because he hopes you will buy a ticket and come to his tourist trap. Like, if he tells you that it was like, yeah, like I stacked a block on top of a block with a tripod, like, you don't come to the tourist trap. Like, it's like entirely breaking the rules if you do this. And yet, they turn this, like, they turn a tourist trap into, well, he must have had secret alien contacts.
Yeah, but Ed did grow to something of a big name somehow with his pamphlets that he sold in local newspaper.
Yes.
So if you're looking up in different forums on, magnetism and energy, he comes up as this unknown genius, while he probably wasn't. And I love also how they say that he could move these big stones all by himself. And at one point they show some guy spinning a stone at the
one of the stones is
museum
set at the park today that you can, as a visitor, can go and spin it. And so
but that's not something they should show if it's impossible for people to move stones by themselves. I say. And also that they managed to squeeze in Professor Sarah Seeger in here, cutting her a bit out of context. So they having her say something like, levitation is the only way that I know to hold up very heavy objects.
Yes, we got the whole maglev train discussion in here. Yeah. Meanwhile, they're showing us photos of the tripod he used. But let's have a discussion about magnetic levitation, because that's more fun.
Yeah, so their thing is that he used the magnetism somehow from Earth with his little black box. That
there's some black box on top
put
of the tripod.
Gravity out of. Yeah. I think that's the only reason why they show the tripod. But just for the black box, that I'm not sure what it did, but I guess it was where he had his pulley or something, I guess. But yeah.
To me, the best part of this section, I think that this whole section of the show was great, because it's like you're talking about a dude in Florida in 1923, and that's part of your alien conspiracy, which is great. But towards the end of it, Giorgio Tsoukalos comes on, and he says, "Am I saying, or am I suggesting he did it with aliens? No." And I'm just like, dude, like, the name of your show is Ancient Aliens. You are suggesting that he did it with alien help. But then he follows it up again where he's like, am I excluding it as a possibility? No, I'm just asking questions.
The fact that one guy created these massive structures, it is absolutely fascinating. Am I suggesting that he did this with extraterrestrial technology? No. Because I don't know. Am I excluding that possibility? No.
And I'm just asking questions is the most dishonest way you can present information. Because they're 100% not taking accountability for what they're claiming and what they're setting up. They're clearly implying that he had alien help. But Tsoukalos is like, I didn't say that. Did you say that? And it's it goes straight back to Chariots of the Gods. I mean, this show was originally founded based on the ideas of Eric von Daniken and his book Chariots of the Gods, which was published with a question mark at the end of that title. Where he's like, I'm just asking questions. All I'm doing is saying, what if? And it is really this sad sleight of hand that allows them to say whatever they want, but have this little back door at the back saying like, bye-bye, we didn't really mean that seriously. Have a good day. And it's like, you can't take them to court, basically. Like you could never, like accuse them of libel or anything like that because they have their questions as a back door. And it's the most infuriating part of this because it's, again, that is a good public engagement strategy because the people watching the show are like, yeah, I just want to think about this. And that's true. And it's the problem where the academy comes off all the time as like talking down to people and saying like, no, it has to be this. And we need to find that middle road where we can say like, look, there's, that there is room for discussion. There's so many cool things. Humans have done so many things, but we actually know there are certain things they didn't do.
Yeah, there's a bunch of great mysteries that's within the realm of possibility that actually would be quite interesting to ask questions about instead of the hyperbolic ancient aliens over the top.
Oh my!
And especially when they put in misinformation, racism, and other quite dangerous ideas. We didn't really cover it, but during the Cusco part, they do bring up the white god thing.
Yeah, they brought up Viracocha and Tsoukalos coming back saying that he's pale skinned and tall. And it's like, this is not, and they're saying that the Inca had a legend about a white god who taught them how to build things. Like, that's from the colonial era. And that is heavily influenced by the colonists coming in and rewriting the ancient world. Like they're leaning into literal colonial white supremacy there.
Yeah, it was good to get it in because, as I said, we both managed to miss it.
No, I have it in my notes, and so I'm sorry. Thank you for bringing that back up because that was one of the more
me too, and I just about. But yeah, they do have this dangerous idea embedded in them, and other dangerous organizations do latch on to it and use it as evidence for their theories. The Mormons, for example, tend to like the ancient aliens, maybe not the idea themselves, but the white god complex, since they believe that white people came to the Americas and then turned brown because they were evil and all of that.
Well, it's being picked up in my own country. Well, and it's definitely being picked up by the alt-right movement at this point. Steph Hamholfer is the one to talk to about this. There's a Canadian archaeologist who's looking at sort of the pseudo-archaeology and the alt-right movements in North America right now. But they're literally, this has become a thing where white supremacists in North America and the United States have started to make the claim like, oh, look, white people were in North America first, therefore it's our continent and we can do whatever the heck we want. Like this stuff gets picked up by fringe political movements even to this day in a very real way, in a very harmful way.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to acknowledge what they are saying and, stop them from just asking questions and sneaking way back out that way. All right. So if the audience would want to hear more from you or read more from you, where should they go?
Well, the easiest place to find me is on Twitter at DSA Archaeology. I've got if you don't like Twitter, I've got a Facebook, sort of not a personal, but a professional Facebook page under DSA Archaeology, and Instagram as well. And I am constantly talking there and trying to reach out and engage with people. So come find me there.
All right. And have you been in any nice new documentaries?
Yeah, actually, the science friction documentary just came out by Skeptoid Media. The science friction documentary was actually, I was there talking about ancient aliens as well, but the general focus of that documentary is how science and scientists are often misrepresented in documentary filmmaking, where they'll be cut and chopped so they make it sound like, in fact, there's a great interview. Everybody should go and watch that film just to hear Ken Fader speak Ken Vader is an archaeologist who's done more than anyone to combat pseudo-archaeology, and has a fabulous book, Frauds, Myths, and Mysteries, that everybody should go and pick up. But he's in science fiction talking about how they really wanted him in an Atlantis documentary, and it's like, but Atlantis isn't real. And they're like, that's okay. We'll just cut it so it sounds like you think it's a possibility. And which is totally what caught my eye in watching this episode that we watched for today, where Graham Hancock and Robert Schoch, Graham Hancock and Robert Schoch, they don't believe in ancient aliens. And yet they are cut in this film or in this episode to make it sound like they are ancient alien folks. This is an incredibly common practice in documentary making to just like say, we've already got our story picked out. We just need some talking heads. And we'll give them whatever titles, like you said, whatever titles we need them to have in this particular episode. And we'll just clip them together so it tells the story we already decided on.
Yeah, it's a good documentary. You should go and see it, if not only for David.
I'm just at the beginning. If you just want me, you can watch like 5 minutes and done. But the whole thing, you should watch to the end because you got to get Fader.
Yeah, of course you should get Fader. But I will let you go then.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great fun.
A huge thank you, David. And if you want to hear more from Dr. Andersson, you should check out his Twitter account at DSA Archaeology, where you can find more of him. And of course, you can find his articles in Forbes linked in the show notes. David will also be featured in a new book called Comics and Archaeology, which will be released somewhere in July or August. When the date is set, I will update the show notes and, of course, make a little note on it on the social medias. But in this book, David will have a chapter where he discusses pseudo-archaeology in video games. And I'm, for one, is really excited to read this, and I hope you are too. Link to the project will be found in the show notes. Remember to leave a positive review anywhere you can, such on iTunes, Spotify, or to your friend at the Trench. I would also recommend you to visit diggingupancientaliens.com to find more info about me and the podcast. You will also find me on most social media sites, and if you have comments, corrections, suggestions, or you want to write one of those emails in all caps, you find my contact info on the website. On our website, you will also find the resources that we use to create this podcast. You will also find usually further reading suggestions, and if you want to learn more about the subjects that we bring up, there you can also now find our sister show, Archaeologists and UFO. Remember to have a listen when you're done with this episode. The intro music was created by Alexander Nakarada, and our fantastic outro is created by the band called Trallskruv with their song Tinfoil Hat. Links to both of these artists will be found in the show notes. Until next time, keep shoveling that science.
Men jag skyddar mig för jag har foliehatt. Och så säger ni det är en galen fantasi att dagens manipulerar oss med telepati. Ni tycker att jag redan är besatt, men jag skyddar mig för jag har
Thank you for tuning in and listening to this episode. Remember that we have a subscription going on. You can become a patron or other subscriber for as little as $2.50 per episode. Go to diggingupancientaliens.com/support. That is, go to diggingupancientaliens.com/support to read more information and sign up right there.